there's not much money in writing fiction.
But is it really just about the money for you?
It's not that simple.
I figured we'd start at the beginning. So where does this character and this story, Mikko, come to you?
The genesis was really moving to London after university and kind of starting to explore and discover the queer scene in London. And it kind of slowly dawned on me just how many young gay men, my peers, were involved in sex work of some kind of more or less casually or more or less openly. And this was even before OnlyFans as well. You know, coming from quite a small town in Finland with a fairly kind of traditional upbringing, I guess there was something about the kind of freedom in a sense that compelled me to want to craft a portrait of a character for whom sex work is more out of choice. We're so used to seeing sex worker depictions where it's either kind of depicted as a last resort or simply out of financial necessity, but more rarely as a valid choice for the character. But then I really wanted to combine this with a reflection on kind of the nature of storytelling itself and thinking about the kind of question of authenticity in this cultural moment where we really value authenticity of voice above so many things, and really think about the question of, do we need to have lived experience to be able to write about something, and who has the right to tell whose stories.
James, how did you get involved in this? Those very thorny questions, which I think sort of speak to the sense that I think for queer artists, that sometimes can be very hard questions of authenticity. But I'm curious how you get involved in this process and help Mikko get it over the finish line.
So we were actually in filmmaking society together at university quite some time ago, and then we worked on the first feature together. Having worked a lot on music videos and fashion promos and lots of things that didn't pay anything, and we made a micro-budget feature. Really, this was in development for several years with the BFI, and we both, were kind of committed to making films that were looking at queer subjectivities but also interested in something that was maybe looking at something that was also more thematically expansive. And this question about who has the right to tell whose story and the ways in and out of the creative process, I think, were things that really, helped sustain it across that period, even as different ways of sex work and different modes became, more common or more prominent. The question of authenticity is something that continues to animate discussions between us and about the film, I think, as well.
Max is quite I want to say a slippery character. He's very opaque, sometimes intentionally and sometimes, and both to himself and sort of to others. And I imagine seeing that on the page must have been thrilling and daunting. Can you tell us a little bit about what it felt like to get inside this young man's skin? No pun intended.
It was my first experience of like a lead role in a feature, so it was my first time that I got to really dive into finding a character completely, and it was such a blessing to be able to do it with a character that was so three-dimensional and so complex and had equal amounts of bad and good, like we all do, so that was really interesting. And it's in those moments where you're like trying to find the justification for certain actions and things like that. But I think I really dove into it in terms of started reading all the literature that I think Max would be reading, and started reading what Mikko was reading when he was writing it, and listening to the music of the character, and kind of just really being in that world. And I was writing more and just trying to kind of fall into it.
Did you find, since we're talking about sort of authenticity and the sort of the literary tradition that this film is sort of entering, Bret Easton Ellis sort of looms as sort of this like almost phantom character. And I'm curious why this particular literary touchstone, what did it bring to the table that you wanted to sort of unearth?
I think the ways in which he is known to kind of play with the idea, within autofiction, and play with the idea of autobiography, the novel, play games with his readership about kind of what's real, what's not, what's fiction. I found that really spoke to the themes of the film, and of course he's an icon as a queer writer, and someone who, in this day and age as well, there are a few writers who've kind of achieved that kind of household name status as well, and fame as well. So I think he made sense definitely as a character for Max to kind of look up to and idolize, and also as Max speaks in the film, he's someone who also found success at such an early age, and of course for Max to be comparing himself to that really added that pressure for him as well to succeed.
James, one of the things that I've noted even in the conversations around this film is how its depiction of sex work is, I don't want to say radical or brave or fearless, because I feel those can be sort of lobbed around, but there is a tenderness and a gentleness that I think if we had said, we're going to watch a movie about a sex worker who's also a writer, those may not be the words that come to mind. Can you talk to me a little bit about why do you think there's this sensibility, and how does it enrich the story?
Yeah, I think from an early stage, the first draft of the script actually had very detailed sex scenes, which raised some eyebrows from development executives who were nonetheless supportive. But all of that was actually very clearly mapped out, and I think because each of the scenes, as Mikko has said, are scenes in their own right that are advancing the story, and sex is also something in cinema which is not seen as much for story elements, so much as maybe titillation sometimes. And I think here you can chart Max's journey as a character. So I think that's a kind of interesting thing that it's doing with the depiction of sex, and particularly the depiction of queer sex, which is maybe sometimes told in a more sensational way.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes we think of queer films or queer sex as always gratuitous or always necessarily needing to, as you say, titillate. And here, you're really plumbing the depths of this character, and you learn a lot. The first experience there's quite the journey from the first sex experience we see him in the film as opposed to the last one. Ruaridh, how did you map that out in the sense of, at times it feels like Max and Sebastian are two people, but obviously they're wrestling for that combination that maybe is what happens at the end. As an actor, how did you work through that in those sex scenes, and also in the character?
Yeah, I mean, the duality of the character I found so tricky at the start. I really just didn't understand how to wrap my head around it almost being two people but not two people at all. And I think it was when Mikko was like, it's not Superman Clark Kent, it's not Batman Bruce Wayne, it's the same person. What it was that the way Max changes is simply to reflect the desires of his clients. And there was also something in the anonymity, of having an alias and no one knows who you are. It's like, when you go on holiday, like I'm here in LA and I'm like, I'm going to talk to a stranger, and I'm being so much more confident and different because no one really knows you, and you've got that freedom of being anonymous. And I think those two things tied together are what really highlighted it. And it was all of the things that Max does as Sebastian are still within him. It's not like anything is artificial or a created persona,
We have roughly 1 minute left, so I wanted to go down and ask a very simple question, which is, what did this movie teach you?
Well, I mean, just kind of as best from quite a, it taught me so much, to be honest. It taught me a whole lot about writing in the first instance. It taught me a lot about kind of moving on to this, bigger production. Working with actors, I got to work not only with new talent, but all these amazing veterans like Jonathan Hyde, Ingvar Sigurdsson, Leanne Best, and so forth. But I won't take up all the time too.
It taught me patience because it took a long time to make, and the edit was not difficult, but it took a moment to arrive at the film that we've got. So it taught me patience.
taught me how to take on a role that at the beginning seemed so terrifying and so much bigger than anything I could ever do. Taught me to embrace my sexuality and to bring it into my work and be proud of that. And 3 seconds for someone else.
We did it. We got it right on time. We could keep talking about this film and of the three of you for hours, but thank you again for joining us, and let us give them a great round of applause. And thank you all for staying.
Thank you,
Thank you so much.
Thank
for
you so
coming.
much. Thank you.